sort of email that went, "I'm sorry if you thought I was being confrontational and blah, 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 blah." Right.
Some of these bands should not have. Roger Waters picked up an instrument, didn't hold back. When they showed off the top, he named 5 bands that he hated the most. The Pink Floyd legend slammed business, bigger people calling out egos being real, and what he called musical. I'm not very up on rock and roll malpractice history. I'm not really interested in most of them. I mean, there are some well-known songs, things that surprise and shock people. To the outright feuds, Waters' list shows the rock stardom has a dark side like never before. Before yourself, it began with admiration in the beginning. 1980s, you also came on the scene as not just another rock band to Roger Waters. That they wrote the music and lyrics for Pink Floyd. At first, they looked like the rightful heirs. Up to the throne of politically charged. Pink Floyd makes rock music that is socially aware. Had been known for a long time for their deep, unsettling looks into how people work, war, loneliness, and power. Their music, not only was it fun, it was a call to awareness, a challenge to ease up. When the two of you jumped on their best on the international stage with their "The Sound is Big," and Bono's passionate talks that Waters saw a spark in, reminds him of the best times with his own band. They packed stadiums with more than just fans, but with people looking for meaning, for it had big themes on a huge scale. Simple. To think that you could carry the torch forward, but admiration as it often can turn into something bad. Darker to the water you two are flying songs and Bono's passionate sermon like denouncing injustices around the world, and soon, salvation started to feel empty. The music itself was once a source of talking about feelings and politics. Struck Waters as having too much sanitized and felt safe. He heard a well-crafted, polished sound that didn't have any rough edges and danger that made the best rock. After all, Pink Floyd's "The Wall" is just music. It was a guttural scream, a self-examination laced with fear and sadness, was a cry from the void packed with pain and contradictions. On the other hand, Water felt you, Joshua. Tree was a show of shiny commercials, anthems that pretend to be sincere, that there were messages, but they went to water. They looked more like grand poseurs. Actions meant to impress instead of cause. What enraged Waters the most was the praise from everyone that you praise, from both critics and fans. People praised them as the new conscience of rock, a group whose music and were just as important as Pink Floyd's in the main things they compare. The Wall and Joshua Tree were not, they were rare. But to Waters they were. He thought these comparisons were against God, an important misunderstanding of what, for an artist with a real sense of art, The Wall was an honest, deeply personal, having to deal with despair and madness. Your music, on the other hand, really felt like ego wrapped in designer sunglasses, the kind of ego that took off on private jets between preaching by charity galas. Salvation from a place of power instead of giving up. It all came together during a London show. Waters came because they were interested, hoping to get back in touch with that early praise, but halfway through the set, as he gave yet another big speech, Bono, about protecting the world's water, stood. He slowly shook his head and got up. "It's all," he said under his breath. "No fire and only smoke." Not only was performance poor in being real, it was actively lowering hopes. The show made people want to do good things, feelings, but no real change to show that made people feel like they were doing something important without doing anything at all. What began as admiration turned into bitter dislike. Roger Waters didn't like rock music meant to boost confidence or comfort. It wasn't to make people feel good. Even though it wasn't supposed to be uncomfortable, to bother or challenge, to make you feel something strong enough to get Pink Floyd to act. Always been about showing the holes in the front of society and yourself. He thought had given up that sense of urgency for Thank You. The Stones, the Rolling Stones, used to be rebels. During their wild youth were the rock and roll defiance at its finest. Roger Waters looked up to them in the 1960s, who they had swagger, soul, and every riff has a dangerous edge to it. It wasn't just sound, it was chaos turned into a careless abandonment that brought out the spirit of a generation. The Stones were the first bad guys. Soul of raw blues mixed with rock. With every chord, they pushed the limits. Every line of music dripping with grit and mindset. But as the years went by, something fundamentally changed. The rough spot started to smooth out. The hot fire where their tours turn into a familiar glow expanded into huge productions, putting in arenas and stadiums with millions of fans. The word that once burned very hotly and started to fade away. Somewhere below the million-dollar light stands for corporate sponsorships and rows of from designer goods to water. It was just evolution. The stones were worn away. Stopped giving the world a hard time, had turned into a brand, a huge machine making money and bringing back memories, putting rebellion in entertainment form for most people. The blues that had given them their real voice, that gritty the core of their music, became a routine that had been practiced. There was no longer the need for speed, the edge that could make you feel the pain and sweat instead of hunger. It was sleek and safe. What to expect? Waters once said something about one moment that really captured this. I'm not sure what Baby Lemonade was. Okay, that empty detachment was for him a sign of a band coasting on their past instead of moving forward. The stones in his eyes had turned into gems. Dressed in nostalgia and business polish is pretty, but in the end it's a fossil of what they used to be. To Waters they had turned into cartoons of themselves, rock stars who trade grit for glitz. It wasn't personal. The protest was just for money. Was the main Water believed deeply in how rock music can move people, setting limits to shake up the familiar and shake society to its very core. The Stones used to have that power, but the Water Company thought they were selling. Their last few albums were meant to comfort people. Empty echoes of their former glory, songs that were written more for radio play and deals on merchandise than for sparking. Really think about it or change the friction. It wasn't between the Water and the Stones. Confined to ideas, it was real. Honest and sometimes very personal. In the 1990s, backstage at a European festival, tensions reached a peak. Water and crew members from the Stones fought over the order of the performance and checks. The sound of what might have been a small argument got worse when one of the Stones' tour managers didn't think Waters were too political for that small group of people. Even though it seemed small, it touched a nerve for Water that had always joined his music that makes strong social statements. Being called too political was like being told to calm down on his own. From that point on, the space between it got colder in both camps. Invitations to work together or show up all together were ignored. In interviews that are subtle but clear, accusations were made against people, digs that are barely hidden behind politeness, language used in public. Neither Waters nor the Stones ever say mean things to each other, or insults have been used in the industry behind those. Everyone knew forced smiles and business no niceties. There was bad blood. A deep rift formed between two generations of rock stars who each represent ideas about how music should sound and what it should mean. So when Waters is ever asked if he'd think about taking the stage with the Stones, the answer is clear and quick. He doesn't want to be in a circus, the big show of rock as a product. He wants a big change. Waters sees music as a tool that can be used to spark change and question the status quo. Status quo is not a background for corporate excess or an old-timey comfort blanket. Stones were thrown to him by hungry crowds. Changing from a fire of rebellion brands to shiny brand icons represents a bigger change in the music world, from art that helps people to cold entertainment with no consequences. Too clean, too careful, or too safe of a game to play. Roger Waters's Coldplay was everything he thought about rock in general. He should never have music in his eyes, and their sound was dull, overs, clean and emotionally lukewarm, taken away from any real threat or bite. On the other hand, Waters came from a lineage of music that screamed challenge and caused discomfort. Coldplay's music felt as carefully as a product is packaged, made to comfort instead of confront. For him, they were the musical essence of that of a soft blanket suffocating a raging fire. Waters never tried to hide how much he hated the kind of rock pop that tailored to fit in with ease. Ads for tech companies, elevators, and he saw Coldplay with other people in shopping malls. Their soft-colored pictures shimmering hope, and big stadium shows were full with grateful cheers as the very embodiment of that blandness in business. Their music wasn't meant to be hard someone or the world. Instead, it looked like it was made to provide a safe audiences a feel-good experience. As well worn out or unwilling to ask for more. For Waters, this wasn't just a style choice, it was a lie. What made Waters most angry wasn't they're incredibly popular. He knew the appealing of being easy to get to, songs that sound empty below the surface, designed for large group sing-alongs, built to bring people together and inspire them, but it feels empty inside the core of the unity they wanted to urge to feel. To Waters, less like not much solidarity, more like apathy hidden as togetherness. Their music did not have the necessary urgency, the jagged, the edges that give art life, and in other words, it made him feel good. Noise for people who are too tired to care, and the world around them was on fire. Conflicts are raging, and corruption is growing. As societies broke up, Coldplay seemed to float calmly above it all. They never called people names, never pointed the finger, harsh criticisms, or made people feel uncomfortable. Truths in their songs and lyrics stayed away from the chaos of today, promoting a general sense of hope. Too much reflection for water. That wasn't neutrality. That was escape. He thought the worst music was born to stir up trouble and hold a mirror up to the cracks in society. Coldplay, by trying to avoid these harsh realities, left that holy duty in cold water. For play didn't see soul, but art and strategy. Scrubbed clean so it's safe to eat clean, to avoid offense, or their songs weren't anthems, which caused a stir, urging listeners to do something, or instead of waking up their consciences, were bedtime stories for a busy age. Mind-calming sounds, and sounds that soothe long enough to forget about the fires going outside. For water it wasn't a failure of art. It was a carelessness in turning down Coldplay. More than just the music he didn't like, the stillness and silence of their songs kept audiences from getting too excited. Seeing while emotionally calmed down the band as a symbol of a bigger change in society and music, where business concerns and broad appeal, realness and courage were often pushed to the side. In this clean soundscape, the one that didn't do it had the loudest voice. Say anything important at all. Waters, his refusal to give in led to disdain. Think music should be more than background noise. It has to be risky, must shake things up as much as they lift them up. Must be enough to make people uncomfortable to think about, question, and then act. Chilled plays soft melodies and glossy. Even though the production was well done, it fell far. They were safe because they didn't reach that mark. Safe harbors during a storm. That a revolt. Inspiration. Roger Waters thought that Muse was a warning for a story about a band that was lucky with a lot of talent and resources, but in the end being hollow at their core from the outside. Muse amazed people with live shows that are intense and full of the swirling lights and loud noise, the kinds of glasses that could captivate football stadiums and arenas with a lot of people of beauty. But to the water below it all that noise and light show laid an unsettling emptiness of the show was just that, a show. It was noise, soul, a false sense of depth without the deep truths that had always pushed Muse's heavy were his own art. Waters as a smokeyok, an image-based approach screen, a clever way to take your mind off of the main problem, that their music did not have the real substance he valued a lot of the time. Their songs touched on ideas of themes of rebellion, dystopia, and resistance that once lit a fire in the heart of rock music. But the dedication felt it was rebellion as a shallow, unfinished mood or style instead of a lived, carefully try something out plan to appeal without putting anyone at risk, being vulnerable to water. This was a denying what it meant for him to rebel. Rebellion was never a short-term feeling or a choice of style, it was a scar that was etched, painful, willing to die, and unequivocal honesty. Muse's music style looked like it took a lot from how big and grand Pink Floyd was, soundscapes for movies. Dramatic, rising to high points and sometimes brooding apocalyptic themes that haven't caught on yet. The imitation was not very good. While Muse copied the size and theater, they missed the core issue, the raw feeling, the pain, and the blood that had always kept Waters going. Pink Floyd's power came from her own work. Real connection with suffering and struggle with being willing to. On the other hand, brokenness and anger. Muse seemed happy with shine and grandeur, creating moments that are meant to be seen but without any real emotional weight. It wasn't just a disagreement about art, caused problems in the real world. At a benefit where both artists said they were booked to perform, Waters wondered why Muse had been given the headlining slot. He thought that the spotlight should go to artists with real, important messages, to those who brought more than just stage flair to the stage, but nothing happened. Insiders talked about in private Waters' anger behind the scenes. It was a polite but firm rebuke, a refusal to back up what he thought was shallow, ego-boosting. Pink Floyd sound gets nods from Muse. Large-scale atmospheric productions felt to not as much like homage and more like they stole something without knowing it was an honor that missed the point, a copy that didn't show respect for the depth and the original. Waters were meant to have long been used to praise and flattery as a part of his legacy, but a copy without any understanding or respect. that was a line that he wouldn't stand for being crossed. The very heart of creativity and rebelliousness that had shaped his career to the water muse showed a troubling another sign of a new generation of artists who put appearance over substance. It looked like they were rebels with apocalyptic with their harsh lighting setups, images and oblique movements, but didn't sound like them, or their music was made to entertain and impress, not to bother or challenge them. They wore the rebellious outfit but didn't have the scars that made that rebellion real. Think of Dragons when asked to picture dragons in, and Roger Waters laughed during the interview. Harsh, rude, and not at all kind, the kind of laugh that used to say a lot. He even asked, "Are you really calling this rock?" he asked with a doubtful tone. Eyebrow, as if the question itself were an Imagine Dragons as an insult to the water, showed everything that was wrong with. They liked modern music when they were in his, in other words, the musical equivalent of quick food, carefully packed up throughout, predictable and made in large quantities to please as many people as possible with the least amount of work or danger. Imagine Dragons as the water saw embodiment of commercialized rebellion, songs with catchy choruses that promised courage and unity but didn't have any real trouble or need to act quickly below the on the surface of their loud, booming tracks with heavy drums and catchy hooks might pack arenas and take over playlists, but according to Waters, they were empty. Anything real in the process. It was music made to entertain and energize crowds that don't want to challenge or make him think. In his view, the band wasn't really a band. They were a brand, an item that is carefully wrapped in guitars and neon lights made just for you, algorithms and halftime shows on TV, rather than to communicate what this idea of artistic expression. Think of Dragons as a product. Was he especially like the water? He himself had once used music to hurt people by writing songs that spoke out against war, concerns about surveillance and society control. His work was rough and angry and not afraid to show uncomfortable things, stark differences between truths. Picture Dragons. It looked like they stood for nothing, but they're taking care of their own marketability everywhere in pop culture, despite because there is no real message. They were more than just shallow acting deep while pretending to have something important to say without ever putting real things at risk. As Waters once said, there's nothing worse, more directly than packaging noise as big change. That phrase showed how much he didn't like her. Exactly. It wasn't just about not liking, it was a bigger criticism of their sound. What they stood for in the music. Think about business and culture in general. Dragons stood for the wearing away of a message in the arts, for marketability and public appeal of the style won out over soul, where Waters saw music as a way to wake people up, disturb and question how they did their work, as music that calmed everyone down and calm in a world that by Waters there were literally fires all over the place. With war, corruption, and a climate crisis and social unrest, think of Dragons. It sounded like denial to him when he heard music. Their songs were made on a drum machine, cleaned up and polished, distractions from the most important issues of the day, people to sing along instead of. They made me think deeply and gave me a sense of safe optimism, is an illusion of defiance that didn't require any pain or sacrifice. For Waters, this was more than just a matter of style not succeeding. It was a failure of culture. Music once played as the background music for revolutions, a loud call to think, power, and a mirror held up to the darkest parts of society. Imagine Dragons, on the other hand, made anthems that encouraged, whether on purpose or not. Being lazy and complacent led to their success. Showed a bigger trend where a strong desire for deep connections, and there was less courage in art and more formulas made for large groups of people. The criticism that Waters made wasn't based on it, was either nostalgia or a refusal to accept change, based on his belief that music's the fact that it can talk gives it power, uncomfortable truths to shake things up, and when that power is weak, galvanize into catchy hooks and good for the market in its packaging, it loses its heart and betrays art. From artists who used there to fight, to mourn, and to demand better.